Alan Rickman. Have you ever wondered why one single word, spoken in a movie theater, made millions of people gasp at the exact same moment? It happened in the final Harry Potter film. The word was always. And it took 10 years and a woman who almost never talks about her private life to finally explain what that word, and the man who said it, really meant. That woman is Emma Thompson. The man is Alan Rickman. And this is the story of a friendship that lasted over 2 decades, survived heartbreak, cancer, and silence, and ended with 2 people changing a lamp plug in a hospital room. Stick with me on this one, because it's not really a story about a movie franchise, or even about acting. It's a story about what it actually looks like when someone chooses to show up for another person, again and again, for over 20 years, without ever making a big deal out of it. No dramatic declarations, no public displays, just quiet, consistent presence. And by the end, you might find yourself thinking about who plays that role in your own life. Let's start at the beginning, because to understand why that friendship mattered so much, you have to understand where Alan Rickman actually came from. And it's not what you'd expect from a man who spent his career playing villains, professors, and judges with icy control. He was born in February of 1946, in a working-class corner of West London, into a family that had far more love than money. His dad worked in a factory. When Alan was only 8 years old, his father died of lung cancer, leaving his mother to raise 4 kids on her own. Now, here's the thing. You can't draw a straight line from a childhood tragedy to a career choice. Life doesn't work that neatly. But watch enough of his performances, and you start to notice something. Grief in his characters never announces itself. It never shouts. It sits quietly under the surface, in a look, in a pause, in the way he holds a sentence just a beat too long. That's not a coincidence. That's a man who learned early what it feels like to carry something heavy, without putting it down in front of anyone. Think about that for a second. A lot of actors are trained to show you everything. The tears, the trembling voice, the big emotional swing that gets clipped and shared online. Rickman figured out something almost the opposite. He figured out that what you withhold can hit an audience just as hard, sometimes harder, than what you give them. And that's a skill you don't just pick up in a classroom. That's a skill that usually comes from somewhere real. Here's something most people don't know. As a kid, Alan Rickman had a speech impediment. His jaw didn't move the way it needed to, and the voice that would eventually become one of the most recognizable sounds in film history started out constricted, almost stuck. When he finally trained at London's Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in his late 20s, one of his teachers told him, bluntly, that his voice sounded like it was coming out of a drain pipe. Imagine hearing that as a young actor. Most people would have quit right there. He didn't. He worked on it, relentlessly, for years, until that same voice became something directors built entire scenes around. That slow, deliberate, honey and gravel delivery? It wasn't a gift he was born with. It was something he built, brick by brick, out of an obstacle. And funnily enough, acting wasn't even his first plan. He actually trained as a graphic designer, good enough that he opened his own design studio in his early 20s. But something kept nagging at him. A feeling, he later said, that he was always going to end up an actor, going all the way back to when he was about 7 years old. At 26, he finally listened to that voice in his head and applied to drama school. No more excuses. It was time. It was actually at art school, before any of the fame, where he met Rima Horton. She was studying economics. They fell into a relationship almost instantly, and with none of the drama you'd expect from 2 young creative types. A relationship that would go on to last 51 years, through his entire acting career, through 2 cancer diagnoses, through everything. They quietly got married in New York in 2012, took a walk across the Brooklyn Bridge afterward, had lunch, and didn't tell almost anyone for a full year. Rima became a university lecturer and a local politician. Alan became one of the most celebrated actors of his generation, and by his own account, she was endlessly patient with him. Practically a saint, he'd joke, for putting up with him for so long. After drama school, he joined the Royal Shakespeare Company, which is really where the foundation got built, the timing, the stillness, the understanding that in acting, doing less is often doing more. He built a reputation on stage first, earning a Tony nomination on Broadway for a French period drama in the late 80s. He was already 41 years old, and he still hadn't made a single film. So what was his first movie role? Not some forgettable side character to ease him in. His first film role, at age 42, was Hans Gruber, the terrorist mastermind in Die Hard, calm, precise, almost amused by his own villainy, playing mental chess with Bruce Willis's exhausted cop while somehow stealing every single scene he was in. Because here's the thing that made Rickman different from almost every other actor of his era. He didn't perform intelligence. He simply had it, and the camera picked it up. There's a story from that shoot that's become legendary. For the famous fall off the skyscraper at the end of the film, the stunt crew told him they'd drop him on the count of 3. They dropped him on 2. The look of shock on his face in that scene? Completely real. That's the actual expression of a man who just got dropped 40 feet earlier than he expected. And it's exactly why that death scene still gets talked about, almost 40 years later. Now pause for a second and really sit with that. A guy walks out of more than a decade of serious Shakespearean theater, and his very first film role, at an age when most Hollywood actors are already being written off as too old for leading parts, becomes one of the most iconic villains in movie history. No warm-up, no small supporting parts to build confidence. Straight into a role that required him to hold his own against one of the biggest action stars on the planet. And he didn't just hold his own, he arguably walked away with the whole film. That's not luck. That's what happens when someone spends over a decade quietly mastering a craft before anyone outside the theater world even notices him. Now here's what's wild about his career when you step back and look at it. The gap between the roles he played and the man he actually was. Hans Gruber, the wonderfully theatrical, scenery-chewing villain in the Kevin Costner Robin Hood movie. The cold, morally bankrupt judge in Sweeney Todd. Snape, obviously. And then, right in the middle of all that darkness, there's Alexander Dane in Galaxy Quest. A classically trained Shakespearean actor stuck playing an alien in a cheesy sci-fi show. Forced to repeat the same ridiculous catchphrase over and over, until the one moment he says it, and actually means it, and it somehow becomes one of the most oddly moving beats in the whole movie. By his own admission, he wasn't fully sold on taking that role at first. Coming from Shakespeare, a goofy space comedy could have felt like a step down. He took it anyway, and he gave it everything, because that was just how he operated. No throwaway performances, no phoning it in. Either he was all in, or he wasn't doing it. Now let's bring Emma Thompson into this story, because their connection is really the heart of everything. She was born in April of 1959 in London, the daughter of a beloved children's TV presenter and an actress. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress in the early 90s for her role in Howard's End, and in that same year, she was also nominated for writing for In the Name of the Father. To this day, she's the only person in history to be nominated for acting and writing in the same year. So by the time she and Alan Rickman first worked together, she wasn't just a talented actress. She was, at that moment, arguably the single best actress alive, and the world was just starting to catch up to that fact. So when these two finally crossed paths professionally, you weren't just getting two working actors on a film set. You were getting two people who had already, independently, spent years mastering the same core idea, that the most powerful moment in a scene is very often the one where nobody says anything at all. That first collaboration was Sense and Sensibility in 1995. Emma had written the screenplay herself, a project that took her 5 years and taught her, she later said, more about the craft of adapting a novel than anything else in her career. She took Jane Austen's story and pulled out the quiet ache underneath all those formal manners, the disappointment, the longing, the specific suffering of smart women boxed in by the world around them. And for the role of Colonel Brandon, the reserved older man whose love for the younger Marianne is so restrained it barely peeks through, there was really only one choice: Alan Rickman. It didn't need a big conversation. She knew, he knew. 20 years of stage discipline had built exactly the kind of actor who could make silence say everything. On that set, Emma was juggling two massive jobs at once, writer and lead actress, and she later said that having Alan there made an enormous difference. He had this quality, she said, of making you feel like you belonged in the room, offering quiet encouragement and steady, grounded advice whenever things got overwhelming. He became, in her words, the safe place to land when the pressure of doing two jobs at once got to be too much. And if you think about it, that's kind of the perfect start to this whole friendship. Not a wild party, not some dramatic on-set romance rumor, nothing like that. Just one person, quietly making another person's overwhelming job a little more bearable, day after day, without ever asking for credit. 2 years after that, the dynamic flipped. He directed her. His directorial debut, The Winter Guest, came out in 1997, a quiet film about a mother and daughter in a cold Scottish coastal town, wrestling with grief and connection, and everything that gets left unsaid between people who love each other. Emma played the daughter. And here's something worth sitting with for a second. Letting someone direct you is a different kind of trust than just acting alongside them. You're handing over control. You're saying, I trust your eye more than my own instincts, at least for now. Emma Thompson gave that trust to Alan Rickman without much hesitation, and she later said she learned things from that experience that she was still processing years afterward. He never softened his honest opinion of her work, she said. He never spared her the unfiltered truth of what was working and what wasn't. And that honesty, that clarity, was something she came to treasure. Then came 2003, and Love Actually, where they played Harry and Karen, a long-married, upper-middle-class couple, slowly falling apart because of something Karen can sense, and Harry is pretending she can't. There's a scene in that film that's become one of the most quietly devastating moments in modern romantic comedy. Karen unwraps a Christmas gift, expecting the necklace she saw her husband buy. Instead, it's a CD. He gave the necklace to someone else. She goes upstairs, puts on a Joni Mitchell record, and falls apart, alone, for exactly as long as she allows herself to. Then she wipes her face, goes back downstairs, and gets her kids ready for the school nativity play. Because that's what you do. That's the whole scene. No dialogue needed. And on the other side of that story, Alan Rickman is doing something just as precise, and a lot less sympathetic, playing a man who knows exactly what he's done and can't stop himself from doing it anyway, whose guilt shows up as overcorrection, as being just a little too attentive, a little too careful with his wife. Emma later said that he told her he genuinely understood that character, that the two of them had long, real conversations about betrayal and forgiveness, and the specific quiet desperation that can live inside a marriage that's gone on for decades. Those weren't just actor conversations about a script. Given that Emma's own marriage to Kenneth Branagh had ended a few years earlier, it's hard not to think those talks were drawing from somewhere much more personal. It's one of those strange things about great acting. Sometimes, the most convincing performances aren't built out of imagination at all. They're built out of two people trusting each other enough to talk honestly about the worst moments of their lives, and then finding a way to put a fraction of that honesty on screen, for the rest of us to feel, even if we never know exactly where it came from. And that's really the thread that runs through this entire friendship: presence. When Emma's marriage was falling apart, it was Alan who showed up. Not with advice, not with a plan. He showed up with a bottle of wine and sat with her through the night, saying almost nothing. And she's said since that his silence never felt like emptiness. It felt like safety. He didn't offer opinions unless she asked for them. She never had to perform being okay around him. That's a rare quality in a person. The ability to just be there, fully, without demanding anything back. Their friendship kept going through the Harry Potter years, even though their characters barely shared a scene. She as the wonderfully eccentric divination professor, he as the cold, controlled potions master everyone loved to hate. And here's the detail that changes everything once you know it. J.K. Rowling had told Alan Rickman the real truth about Snape's character years before anyone else, before the books that revealed it were even published. She told him about Lily. She told him about Always. And for 8 films, across a full decade of shooting, Rickman carried that secret in complete silence, playing every ounce of Snape's bitterness and cruelty as the surface of something much deeper. Grief, for someone he loved and could never have, expressed by spending the rest of his life protecting her son, while pretending, endlessly, to despise him. So when that final film revealed the truth, audiences who'd been watching for 10 straight years suddenly understood, in one moment, why every single scene before it had looked exactly the way it did. He knew the whole time. He'd been playing it the whole time. Think about the sheer discipline that takes. 10 years, 8 films, hundreds of days on set, surrounded by directors, co-stars, and journalists constantly asking him to explain his character. And not once did he let that secret slip. Not a hint, not a wink to the camera, nothing. Just an actor who trusted the story enough to let it unfold exactly the way it was supposed to, even if it meant a decade of people misunderstanding the character he was building the entire time. In those same years, Alan Rickman was quietly carrying something else, something almost nobody knew about. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2015. He didn't make it public. He told only his closest circle, kept working, kept showing up, and handled the entire thing with a kind of composed dignity that his friends later described as completely in character. And, honestly, a little maddening, because everyone who loved him would have wanted the chance to know. He kept making plans. He kept the illusion of a future going, even though he likely understood, better than anyone, exactly how short that future actually was. Emma later described him as someone who was distant and hard to read in public, but startlingly, fully present in private. And in those final months, that same quiet distance became almost protective, a way of shielding the people around him for as long as he possibly could. There's something almost unbearably fitting about that. A man whose entire career was built on saying more with silence than most actors say with an entire monologue, choosing, at the very end of his own life, to protect the people he loved with that exact same silence. He wasn't hiding the truth because he was ashamed of it. He was managing it the way he managed everything, quietly, on his own terms, giving away only what needed to be given away, and holding on to the rest for himself. The last thing the two of them ever did together, according to Emma, was change a light bulb plug on a standard lamp in his hospital room. And honestly, it's a perfect ending to the story, because it sounds exactly like every other thing they'd ever done together. She tried it first. It didn't work. He told her to try it a different way. Still nothing. He had a go himself. She got impatient and grabbed it back from him. Still wrong. He calmly took the whole thing apart again, found the right wire, put it in the right slot. She screwed the plug back together. They both complained about how fiddly the whole thing was. Then they made tea. The entire ordeal took about half an hour, and afterward, he joked that it was probably a good thing he never became an electrician for a living. Emma Thompson has said she's still heartbroken that he's gone. But reading back through his old diaries, which were later published, she says she finds so much of what she remembers most: his sweetness, his generosity, his sharp critical eye, his humor, his intelligence. On the morning she found out he'd died, she sent a journalist just 7 words, because she doesn't use social media, that she had just said goodbye to him. And in the tribute she wrote afterward, she called him the ultimate ally, in life, in art, and in politics. And that word, ally, isn't one she chose casually. An ally isn't someone who agrees with your every move. It's someone who sees the whole picture of who you are, the strengths and the flaws, and everything messy in between, and chooses to stand with you anyway. Emma Thompson found that in a man who turned a broken, constricted voice into one of the most iconic instruments in film history. A man who played monsters so convincingly that people occasionally forgot he wasn't one. A man who spent his public life chasing the truth of a character and his private life quietly protecting the people he loved. Right down to arguing over a lamp plug in a hospital room. Together, irritably, imperfectly, and, in the end, correctly, over a cup of tea. She said she doesn't know what he'd think of the decade that's passed since he left. what films he'd have watched, what he'd have made of the world today, whether he'd have kept writing those diaries, or kept pushing the people around him to stop underselling their own talent. But she knows what he'd say about her, because he never spared her the honest view. Not once, not ever. She wrote, 10 years ago, that we would not see his like again. And honestly, that might be the truest sentence anyone's ever written about him. Some actors leave a gap when they go. Alan Rickman left a very specific shape behind. The shape of someone who was fierce and gentle at the same time. Devastating on screen and endlessly supportive off it. Impossible and irreplaceable in the exact same breath. And on the mornings when that gap feels the widest, Emma Thompson still orders 2 teas. It's such a small detail, isn't it? 2 cups instead of 1. Nobody sitting across from her to drink the second one. And yet somehow, that tiny, ordinary habit says more about what a 20-year friendship actually means than almost anything else in this whole story could. Real connection doesn't always look like grand gestures or dramatic speeches. Sometimes it looks exactly like that. An old ritual you can't quite bring yourself to stop, long after the other person is gone. So here's a question worth sitting with for a second before you go. Is there someone in your life who's been that kind of ally to you? Someone who saw every single side of you, the good, the messy, all of it, and chose you anyway? Drop their name in the comments. We'd genuinely love to hear who that person is for you. And if this story hit you somewhere, if Alan Rickman's voice, or one single look on his face in one single scene, ever made you feel something you couldn't quite put into words, hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories like this one. We'll see you in the next video.